welcome to Coffee Chats. My name is Lindsey Giese, and I'm the Executive Director for River Arts Inc. And today I am joined by the first ever distiller for the Wollersheim Distillery, the first ever and not only,
First ever and only.
first ever and only distiller at the Wollersheim. Oh my goodness. Cheers, Tom Lenerz.
Cheers.
It is such a pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to dive right in and get to know you better. I have so many questions for you, but I would like for you to start in your own words to tell us about who you are.
I'm Tom.
Who is Tom, really?
Who is Tom? So I'm Tom. I'm a Sauk Prairie resident. I've lived in Sauk Prairie most of my life, other than a few years in college. Fell in love with my high school sweetheart, and we moved to New York for her to do her master's program. And then while we were out there, I kind of discovered I really like whiskey and spirits, and kind of dove into the industry. And when we moved back, I kind of went full force into that. And now I'm still here in Wisconsin making liquor.
Awesome. I noticed that you skimmed over a crucial part of your history, which was being a part of the Sauk Prairie executive session.
I was part of the Sauk Prairie executive session, yes.
Thank you. Class of
05.
05.
Yep.
So we overlapped a little bit. We were in show choir together.
Yeah.
Are you still singing today, Tom?
Not as much as I used to in the 2000 to 2005 era of my life, but yeah, I make up a lot of not great songs for like the family, just kind of like sing a song about things that we're doing in the kitchen or whatever. But yeah, no, not in any real way. I wouldn't describe myself as staying with it.
And speaking of staying with it, so you graduated with Matt Brennan.
I did, yeah.
Many people in the community know as well. And you're on a bowling team with him.
Yeah, not one of my greatest accomplishments, but yeah, it's on the list of things I do. Yeah.
I'm wondering, during these times, are you worried that your bowling average is going to suffer because you're not able to play right now?
Not at all. If anything, it might be good to get like a hard reset, and start back at 70, 75 before the handicap. Yeah, that'd be nice.
A good strong start.
Yeah.
See, you thought we were going to talk about only distillery things, and
I was hoping.
Really digging in here. Well, I did do a little bit of research because you mentioned that when you went to New York, you really got into things, and then when you came back here, your journey with distilling did not begin at Wollersheim Distillery.
Right.
What did that begin with? Like, what aspect of that industry?
So back when let's go way back to the executive session era.
And alcohol.
And then, well, so nobody, in high school, when I was in high school, nobody ever told me that you could like make liquor for a living. Like that wasn't something that guidance counselors tell you. So my big hobby in high school was like computers and stuff. So I went off to college and was really focused on computers. And then in 2010, when Selena and I got married, I left UW. I was doing a computer science degree there. I just decided I hated computers. And one night over dinner with Philippe and Julie, my in-laws, we were discussing this idea that Philippe had been talking about since the late 80s of distilling brandy. And being 23 and being who I am, my dad was always really into whiskey, so I was really into bourbon myself. I had tried like 4 different bourbons at that point and made a comment to Philippe like, oh, well, that sounds cool, but making a all Wisconsin whiskey sounds cooler. And he said, oh, well, maybe someday we'll make like 5 barrels of bourbon. So when we moved to New York, I was exposed. We moved to the Finger Lakes, and within an hour of where we lived, there was 120 wineries and probably about 30 to 40 breweries. And I found a job at the only distillery. Like I didn't even know, like, oh yeah, small distilleries exist. Like this is a place you could go work. And so I started working there in 2010, and a lot of self-studying of spirits, which meant a lot of tasting. Um, yeah,
Awesome job.
yeah, and just kind of really like delving into it. And then when we moved back, I worked one summer here in the vineyard, but at that point we were distilling at the winery, but we didn't have the distillery. There wasn't really we weren't really sure what my role would be and whatever. So I decided at that point to just stay committed to the industry, and I got a job at Lake Louis Brewing Company in Arena. And Tom Porter there was an excellent mentor for me, and through a lot of like hold my flashlight moments, I learned a lot about just like day-to-day operations and production and things like that. And then in 2014, I came back to the winery. So
I joke about like that your job is drinking, but obviously there's much more to the business side of distilling.
right.
So let's talking about whiskey, since that's kind of where I know Wollersheim does much more than that, but
Right.
that's where it sounds like your passion started. How many recipes or variations do you go through before you got to the whiskey that you sell today?
So the first year of distilling, 2000, in the new distillery. So we started distilling in 2010. 2015, we opened the distillery, and the first day our equipment was operational was also the first day of harvest. So like the entire winemaking team was like, "See ya, have fun." And so I was all by myself for the first 3-4 months, kind of just like tinkering with recipes and ideas and just trying things out. And so one of the big things, like bourbon is obviously the most popular whiskey, and for us as winemakers, you talk to a bourbon producer, it's like, what kind of corn do you use to make your bourbon? They're like, we use yellow #2 dent corn. And that's like saying, as a winemaker, that'd be like asking what kind of grapes are in this wine and being like, it's made with red grapes. And it's, for us, that was just like a foreign idea. So we really wanted to explore varieties of corn and like how their flavors would impact the spirit. So the first year I did a lot of trials, just even with like the exact same recipe, using 4 different varieties of corn: yellow corn, and then the standard yellow #2 dent, field corn, and then also 3 heirloom varieties of different colors of corn: red, white, and blue. And in addition to that, like we tweaked, by we I mean I tweaked the percentage of each grain, and the yeasts that we use, the fermentation temperatures we use, how we operated the still each day. The way we were set up is, at the time I was distilling 12 to 13 hours a day, and I could distill 500 gallons of mash in one day. And I could also cook 500 gallons of mash and ferment 500 gallons of mash. And that makes about 1 barrel of whiskey. So literally every day for about 3 to 4 months, I was making, almost every day was a different type of whiskey, so to speak, just from the standpoint of I was playing around with different variables.
Yeah.
Even like when I honed some things in, for example, like our rye whiskey, after I picked the grain bill that I wanted to use and the yeast and all that, now I got to pick the barrel. So I did 3 sets of cooks and put them in or actually I got to pick the barrel, and I was picking the yeast. So I did 3 sets of cooks and 3 different yeasts, and I had 1 barrel in all 3 sets of barrels that was exactly the same. And then I had variables of different types of barrels in each yeast. So I could see, with this yeast, how is it with a char 3 versus a char 4? And does seasoning 18 months versus seasoning 3 years make a difference? And does toasting before charring and everything? So at one point over a 1 month period, I made 21 unique barrels of rye whiskey that would allow me to a year, over 6 months, a year, 2 years later, taste them and make decisions and narrow down like this is the yeast I want to use and this is the barrel I want to use.
Um, so do you remember anything about those months?
Uh,
It sounds actually very scientific, like mathematical.
It's both scientific and artistic at the same time because unlike my wife, I'm not a trained food scientist. So and we don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of like lab equipment to do like deep analysis of the chemical compounds. Like if I worked at Buffalo Trace or Jim Beam and did those experiments, they would have like a lab technician actually do like scientific analysis of each barrel and like have like a chemical profile for each barrel. And they would do like a sensory team. They bring in like 40 people and everybody would taste it and write what they say. And then they would graph out like the common, like, well, 30 out of 40 people said this or whatever. And they make a spider graph kind of drawing what each flavor profile looked at. And we weren't that scientific, but it is like, it was set out in a way that it, we were putting out controls and we kind of knew where we wanted to go before we got started. And so maybe we leaned a little heavier on making that a reality, but we did do blind taste. Like I would just set up 5 glasses for Philippe and be like, which one do you like? And, he would taste through them or whatever. And we do a lot of that. Celine will set up blind samples for Philippe and I, and we'll taste through and yeah.
Who is part of you refer to it as a sensory team. So you don't have a 40-person team, but who is,
right.
Is it the family? Like,
really
get in on it too?
Yeah. So as a team, it's a family affair. I would say typically the day-to-day tasting, I try to block off a half an hour to an hour a couple times a week in the morning to taste, kind of just checking on things like, oh, I know I'm going to be bottling something in 6 months. Let's see where we're at, where it's progressing. Or like, oh, I need to get blend ready. Let's pull some samples and I'll taste a bunch of samples. And I do a lot of the like funneling down. So like I'll taste maybe a dozen things or 2 dozen things over a couple days. And then I'll meet with Philippe. It's usually just Philippe and I, and often Celine, especially if we have a blind element to it, where we'll narrow it down to like 3 to 5 things. With spirits especially, it's tough to be critical for long stretches of time. With the wine team will literally taste through 40 barrels of wine or 60 barrels of wine, and they'll taste back to back. And it's a lot of sipping and spitting and things like that. With spirits, because of the alcohol content, it's really easy to think, wow, this first one, because I'm just warming up, was really hot and out of balance or whatever. And then by the time you get to the last one, you're like, wow, this is really good. And then you go back to the beginning and you're like, oh, this one's also really good. And so you really got to narrow it down to like 3 or 5 and kind of get warmed up and kind of taste through. And again, we like to do all of our tasting in the morning. That's when your palate is the most awake and ready to go. So,
and you have to like taste them in different orders on different days.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's like Celine, because she studied that at Cornell, is really aware of like trying to remove biases. So, she'll put things out and, maybe we're testing like what proof we should bottle it at. And I gave her 5 samples and it's 80 to 100 proof and there's a couple in between. And she'll mix them up and she'll deliberately mix them up in a way to confuse me, because she knows I know what they are and that I already have a preconceived notion, even though I haven't actually done the tasting yet.
Like wine, I think everybody's palate is a little bit different, and I'm sure because this is the business that you're in, like there really are things that make a wine superior over others, but everybody has different tastes too.
Right.
You find that when you're tasting with Philippe, though, like, do you both have similar palates and agree, or do you sometimes disagree?
We agree more often than not. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I've been, what I like and what I value, both as just like broad strokes brand philosophy, as well as just like the things I enjoy in the product. Um, he's shaped a lot of that with me, and I've shaped that with him to some extent, because we do so much tasting together. And I've tried, like, I'll buy a random bottle of liquor and bring it to him. In 2013, I buy a random bottle of liquor, like, hey, let's try this, and we talk about it and everything. And so over the last 10 years, we've definitely influenced each other and grown in some consensus. I would say there's also like a generational thing where, as the younger generation, or even just like an enthusiast thing, a lot of the whiskey enthusiasts tend to really like high proof spirits or like maybe really bold stuff, whereas Philippe takes kind of a more reserved and balanced approach that maybe is good for the wide spectrum. So we take that in mind when we're tasting things, like who is this product for, and who, it, do we want to make something. Like, we just did some cask strength whiskeys, and back in 2016, if somebody asked me if we were going to do some cask strength whiskeys, I would have said no, because in general, a lot of people are turned off by that. But there's been such a change in education, even in the last 2 or 3 years, with spirits, that there's definitely a section of the population who likes those and seeks those out. And so we're just making sure that it's very clear when we market it that this is a cask strength product. The proof is on the bottle, and it's not our regular thing. So don't buy it thinking it's Jim Beam at 90 proof, and when it's actually like 116 or something. So it's just, so Philippe and I usually, like, in general, we agree towards like a general vision of what the flavor should be, but we might vary on the presentation of that. Like, I've kind of leaned a little bit more towards that enthusiast, a little extra proof gets you a little more extra flavor, whereas Philippe's more about the like general experience. Like, that extra proof isn't as enjoyable. I just want to be able to drink it and enjoy it. So kind of likes those lower proofs. But yeah.
Okay, here's a big one, a little more serious. Maybe. What is your favorite part of the business and least favorite part of the business?
I think my favorite part of the business is um, the variety. Like, there's always a new thing to figure out, whether it's a production technique or a marketing idea or like a sales thing or a retail thing. There's always something different to figure out. Um, I, I get bored easily, so I think that's um, I've always really enjoyed, like, the variety keeps me really engaged. Even coming back to things that it's like, oh yeah, we did this 6 months ago or whatever, but I forgot all about it. Now I'm coming back to do it again. That just, like, every day is a little bit different. Thing I don't like, I guess it's not really a specific thing, but again, kind of like dovetails on that variety aspect of kind of something abstract. When things don't go as planned for whatever reason, just like, I do a lot of planning. Nothing about distilling is short term, so you plan things out for like 2 years and 3 years to start. And now I'm working on plans through 2025, 2028. We just transitioned our rye whiskey to a 4-year age. And so now, like any rye whiskey I make, I have to guess how much rye whiskey I'm going to sell 4 or 5 years from now. And there's a lot of business that can happen in between. So when you plan something and you're like, oh, this is how it's going to go, and then it doesn't work that way, or it doesn't go that way, that's kind of frustrating. And it can really, especially, it depends how long you've been like planning on something going that way.
So this year was probably through a wrench in things.
Yeah. So it's like for the last,
unless you planned for this, and if you planned for this, Tom, and didn't tell anybody.
I did not plan for this. Yeah, it's been a really interesting struggle of, from 2015 through March of 2020, early March 2020, it was all about, all right, this is a new product. How can we introduce it? How can we get people familiar with it? And like everyone knows, Wollersheim's been making wine forever, but trying to get people up to speed with what our spirits are and how what they are, how we make them, and what the distillery brand is, and how it's different from the winery in some ways, and what is similar. Over the last 4 or 5 years, that's been like, okay, it's all about exposure. Like, let's go out to the market, let's do these events, or let's get out to bars and restaurants and make sure these bartenders know about our product and are offering our product and things like that. And then this year it was just like, okay, how do we grow the business in a way that is socially responsible, and how do we tell people not to come? Like, we're open, but like, you don't want, we want people to come, but we want people to come in a safe way. And how do you get people to come and buy things and support your business without, and have a safe and responsible experience without letting everything fly off the rails. And I think we did a really good job this summer figuring that out.
Well, the pickup situation is phenomenal. Like, for people just to order and like safely pick up whatever you want.
Yep.
Great. And even one time I got some wine and they just, I don't want to, maybe I shouldn't share this because it probably doesn't happen all of the time, but they threw in a little piece of, like a little cheese dip.
Yep.
Just for fun.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah, we were doing that we were shut down for 12 weeks or 11 weeks. And normally we had cheese dip inventory. So it's like, well, if people buying some wine, we can't, like, people aren't buying cheese dip to go. So it's just like, hey, here's a little gift. Thanks for supporting us. So yeah, we did that for a while. Right now we're doing, we're just kind of wrapping up our case club. Normally we have case club, which is our busiest time of the year at the winery. And that just wrapped up and last weekend, but we're still it's kind of stretched and kind of extended as like a holiday thing. So people get their cases of wine or whatever. And normally we have this very public and crowded tasting where people wander around and try the wines and try some cheese, like free samples of cheese. And so what we did was provide an option to buy like a mixed gift box. And
still some virtual.
And the virtual, yeah.
Tastings, I guess.
Yeah, so Fleep did one. Fleep and Celine did one. I believe a couple other people were involved earlier this week. And I'll be doing one with Celine on Wednesday. And it's like, we've been bundling. Normally we've been trying to get people to try our spirits through offering them cocktails on site. But with COVID, that's harder to do, or fewer people feel comfortable. So we've been doing like a bundled cocktail kit. And so we have 4 cocktail kits right now for the holidays.
Fun.
Yeah.
And just the way that the grounds are set up, but it just was a really nice, safe way for people to still do something socially, but outside and get
Right.
out as much as possible. And I mean, there couldn't be a more beautiful place to spend
Right.
time. So
Right.
it
Right.
was great.
Yeah.
Some random questions here I've got coming up. What is the earliest you've ever had a drink for work?
For work. For work or for personal? For work, usually it's like, well, 5 a.m. I guess, probably technically. Um, I guess it depends on like what you consider a drink. When when we started distilling in 2015, uh, my production schedule was 4:30 to 5:30 Monday through Friday,
Okay.
and so I would come in, fill up the stills, and then about 5:15, the stills start to drip, and so as the still warms up, we do a lot of tasting to see, uh, where the what it tastes like, and where we are in the run, because as the still warms up, you get different flavor compounds. So very early on, we get a lot of like solventy, heads heart, solventy, like acetone kind of nail polish remover
Mhm.
smell, and that's called the heads. And so 5 o'clock, I would be smelling and tasting that 160 proof spirit off the still to see, where it's going. And then once we get past those solventy, undesirable flavors, we switch to the hearts, which is the good stuff that ends up going into the barrel. And then that would progress until, if I was starting at 4:30, we would collect hearts from 5:30 until 9:30, and then we would make a tails cut where we, again, like the alcohol content would drop, start to get some more undesirable, like heavy, sweaty, fatty, kind of oily flavor compounds that aren't desirable. And so we would make a switch again, and that we would collect tails until about 11:30, drain the still, refill, and run again till about 5:30. And so 5 a.m. is the
Oh,
answer to that question.
I like that it's the heavy, sweaty, fatty, oily. It's like the
Yeah.
sounds horrible.
Yeah, it does sound horrible. And the surprising thing is, like, all the flavor compounds in the run, in when you distill, all those flavor compounds are in your base. So, when we're distilling a wine, all those flavor compounds are there. But when you're distilling, you're getting a steady stream, and it's all concentrated of one temperature.
Mhm.
And so you would never notice it. Like, you're drinking a glass of wine, you would never notice those flavors. But as it's coming off the still, like early on, you get those solventy things, and then later on, you would get those like fatty things. And
You're like,
yeah,
this is the stinky feet part of the process.
yeah, exactly. And it's not, when you describe it that way, people get like maybe turned off a little bit. But like what we collect, even the new make spirit, um, with whiskey especially, like I describe it as like fresh cut corn, or like like grassy, or even almost like a silagey smell. And it's borderline food to like kind of undesirable. And that's why we barrel age spirits is, you take those flavors and you put them in a barrel and you let them develop over time and extract caramel and vanilla from the wood, and that kind of develops and masks some of those less desirable flavors. So
You're going to be you mentioned that you and Sabine are going to talk about some of your favorite holiday cocktails, but in general, do you have like a go-to cocktail?
a go-to cocktail,
Something easy that's your favorite that if somebody said what's one cocktail I need to have, what's the one?
Sazerac is one of my favorite cocktails. Um,
And what I don't
any
know what that is.
A Sazerac.
Yep.
So they believe the old fashioned gets its name from the Sazerac. The Sazerac's often considered the oldest American cocktail, and they were making them in New Orleans. And it's Peychaud's bitters, which is like a pink bright pink bitters, sugar, and rye whiskey, and then you put it in glass with an absinthe rinse and express like a citrus peel. And they believe the origin of the old fashioned, which is different than the Wisconsin old fashioned, was a guy went into a bar and requested a cocktail made the old fashioned way and tried to explain to a bartender how a Sazerac was made. And the bartender didn't have Peychaud bitters, so he used Angostura bitters, and he like muddled an orange instead of, and so they think there's like a lost in translation thing, and that's how like the old fashioned became got its name. But yeah, I would say like the old fashioned, Sazerac, and like any of I call them Tom drinks. They're basically anything that's just like spirits and then like something to sweeten it a little bit and something to bitter it a little bit. And then a little bit of like ice or water just to chill it. It's basically, yeah, that's a Tom drink.
What is your most popular product?
At the distillery, it's the press house brandy. And by extension, the brandy old fashioned cocktail.
Did that change? Like, did you see a difference in the types of sales you were having because of COVID? Like COVID and during COVID, like did things change? I don't mean like the quantity of sales necessarily, but what are people buying?
Yeah, so I would say the alcohol industry in general has
Done okay.
done okay in some ways, and in other ways.
Thank you. Thank you for your work supporting all of us.
There's been a shift in how people consume. And over the last like 3 to 5 years of the distillery, it's been like, oh, there's this like drink curious customer that is always wanting to try something new, is willing to spend extra money at the bar for a fancy cocktail with weird ingredients or whatever. And it's like, how do we take advantage of this situation where like people are trying things, and how do we convince these people that like, hey, you should keep us in your stable? Everybody, I talked to a guy earlier today, and he said there's a brewery in Chicago whose slogan was, we don't have to be the only beer you drink, but we want to be your favorite beer. And that is, over the last few years, that's what we've been trying to do. How do we get in people's portfolio of things that they try? And it's like, well, I don't always drink brandy, but when I do, I might try Wollersheim's or one of the things Wollersheim makes. With COVID, we saw kind of a flip, and the people who were maybe experimenting or like going to the bar and trying a different drink all the time, instead, and I did it personally, kind of like, there was like a search for like some stability or like something familiar. And so like personally, I used to, when I go to the grocery store and buy beer, I would like try different things every time. And by and large, since March, I've only bought 2 different beers, and it's kind of just like a return to something familiar. Like, these are 2 beers that I trust, and breweries that I would be sad if they weren't here next year. And with Wollersheim, we definitely saw that. Brands like our press house brandy, everybody likes old fashions and everybody likes supporting locals. So maybe instead of buying normally I would go to a bar and buy Corbel old fashions, but because I'm not, I'll spend extra to buy a local brandy and make better old fashions at home. And so we've seen some support with things like that. But then like on the flip side, some of our products that require trial or maybe some of that adventure, like our absinthe or our vermouth, those products, like, people really need to taste it and really need to find a creative way to use it. And people don't seem to be in the mindset for that. And so those products aren't doing as well. Mm-hmm. Whereas like our core products that people are familiar with, like our press house brandy and our Prairie Fumé, people are kind of coming home to that. And so that's been good.
Obviously, a lot of planning went into the construction of the distillery, and maybe you got it perfect, but I think in hindsight, or as you're using the space, you learn things.
Yeah.
Are there any of those discoveries that you've made now in the last 5 years that you were like, oh, if only, I wish that we would have done this had I known?
Yeah.
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 Are
Yeah.
there any that you can share?
Uh, well, like I think one of the most obvious ones are things we've already done. Like our distillery retail space, Wollersheim has never wanted to be like we close at 5 o'clock. So obviously we're not a bar. We don't want to be a bar atmosphere. It's all about education and getting people to try things and explaining to people, this is what makes brandy brandy. Like we have people come in and I wrote a tour and uh, typed it up and I gave it a couple tours and then I gave it to one of our retail people, Jesse, and he was like, "Well, I'm going to add something," and it was very simple. And it's who knows who knows the difference between brandy and whiskey, and surprisingly, a lot of people don't. And to me, as a distiller, it's like, well, obviously they're very different for XYZ reason, but that's kind of like a big part of the Wallersheim philosophy is like explaining to people, regardless of your skill level, we want to be able, or your personal knowledge, we want to be able to uh, kind of guide you and explain some things to you and show you the differences in things so you can learn about them and then theoretically enjoy them more, or at least figure out why you don't enjoy something or why you do enjoy something and kind of focus in on that. So like in our distillery store, for example, we weren't going to do cocktails because bars serve cocktails. This is a tasting room. We just want to taste people on spirits. And after a year or two of nothing but whiskey face, which we were expecting, and whiskey face, for the people who don't know, is when somebody who doesn't like whiskey drinks whiskey, they go. And that's whiskey face. So after like 2 years of whiskey face, we started implementing some changes into our retail experience. And so now the cocktail program is a very important part of what we do. And we literally tore out like like the furnishings under the bar. We literally tore it out and drilled holes in the floor and ran plumbing and stuff. So we have like a functional craft cocktail bar, if you can call it that, at the distillery. So that's something we have changed, and I can talk about. But yeah.
Oh, cool. All right, so kind of wrapping up here, getting to the end. So in my little homework that I did, I found some dates here that 1972, I know this won't be news for you, but for our one listener, in 1972, Bob and Joanne Wollersheim bought the winery.
Mm-hmm.
1984 was when Philippe joined the crew and started changing some things up, adding his own taste.
Yep.
Is that safe to say?
Yeah, that's when he came on board.
Okay.
88 was the Fume. I don't know if that's
Oh, that wasn't coming up. No, that's good. Okay. But it was,
that.
but and that was substantial. That was Philippe's.
That was the Philippe always refers to it as the switch. Like that's when things got turned on, and that was that was his idea, and he.
Is that when, but like Bob and Joanne kind of took a step back, or when did
no? They were still very involved. But yeah, so Philippe originally came out as an intern, and then I don't remember the exact year, but Bob offered him the role of winemaker to stay on board. So.
But so then there's this long period of time. It's not till 2015 that the distillery officially opened. Mm-hmm. Now the bistro opened in 2019. So there's like boom, 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 like all of these awesome things happening. So what is next, Tom?
What is next is hopefully taking a breath, taking a step back.
I'm searching for some exclusives here.
Some exclusives. We don't have, right now, we don't have any like future plans. 2020 was going to be the year of really kind of like bundling the whole package of wine and spirits together back in February, and food, wine, spirits, and food. Back in February, we did a after hours spirits soiree where basically we had like a limited cocktail menu for the night and like hors d'oeuvres and everything. And we did like a ticketed event, and it included two cocktails and all the food and everything. And we didn't announce anything, but we had like an internal calendar with like dinner in the vineyard and dinner in the cellars and stuff like that. And obviously with 2020, like that didn't happen. So
the bistro is fantastic. Roman's doing such an amazing job there. And did I read correctly that you can get some things to go?
yeah, so we are offering a couple different things. He's offering in like to go size containers for like soups.
Yeah.
But then also he started last week and the week before with like a featured meal of the week that's ready to go.
Yeah, like a wine pairing suggestion, and
Yeah,
I'm still thinking about it. It looks delicious.
yeah, yeah. The first one was coq au vin and like dessert, and I think there was a salad. And then he just switched over to like a Italian themed stuffed manicotti thing. So
I love
I
it.
haven't tried it yet.
If there were no any regulations you had to follow, or like no constraints, no financial constraints, like nothing whatsoever, where would you take Wollersheim? Like what would be the next thing you would do? Or just not even Waller, like what dream do you have, Tom?
My dream, this is gonna sound cheesy, my dream since 2011, 2010, when I started working at the distillery, I was like, oh, this is a real job. I want to make whiskey someday. And I used to bug Celine like crazy. Like every couple days, I would just be like, I really want to make whiskey. She's like, I know. And so I've done that now. Like that's what I'm doing, and it feels really great to have the opportunity to do that. And I'm really thankful that Philippe and Julie trusted this kid basically to figure it out. Things are going pretty well, and so I'd like to continue making it work. The big thing, like you mentioned, like, well, no regulations. It's like, well, as far as like the no regulations aspect goes, like we already closed at 5 o'clock, so it's not like, oh well, we'd be open till 2, because it's not like we're pushing up against those regulations anyway. And then as far as like the no money side of that, kind of like money's no object kind of thing, that's an interesting situation as well, because like looking at the distilling industry, there's a lot of people either with like personally have a lot of money who get involved in the industry, or like venture capital or large corporations who get involved in the industry. And often I've found it's very temporary. People will come and take a small fortune of money and build a brand and make a large fortune of money in a couple of years, and sell it to somebody else, or do something and kind of just like ride a wave. And that's not what we're about here. And so, like what is the long-term future? It's like, well, I'm hoping my kids are interested in the business and would like to be involved when they're older. If they're not, then we have to figure something else out, but that's a long ways away. So
Maybe a person from abroad, like another Philippe will come along. And
yeah, you never know.
Philippe entered Bob and Joanne's, and just it was just a perfect fit.
Right. And everything about what we do is very much like, it's all about slow and steady and organic, just like natural growth and natural extension. Like, this makes sense, let's add this, or this sounds cool, let's try that out. And Philippe always says you got to learn to walk before you run, and that's kind of like the way it's going. And this year we've bottled 11 barrels of bourbon in that came out in June, and we ran out in November, and that's that. Okay, we didn't make enough, but like I'm making 100 barrels or 80 barrels of bourbon this year, so it's like we're growing, like we're laying down more inventory and we're growing into it. So yeah, if money was no object, I would maybe make more whiskey, but it's kind of, you still have to have built the brand and developed everything, and so it's just kind of like, if you add, oh, we have the whiskey, then we need the more marketing, and if you have more marketing and sales, then you need the more whiskey, and so it's just kind of a self-feeding cycle. So
and then do you have do you have the time to grow that fast, because you do have such a personal touch in everything that you're doing there right now, that
right
you're only one
right
person. I mean, I know that there are many people there, but you have a hand in all of it. So
right yeah, and that's kind of like, that's the big difference, going all the way back to the beginning of the conversation. Like, the big companies have these large sensory panels, and you ask, who is our sensory panel? It's like, it's Philippe and I, for the most part, when it comes to spirits. And it's really about, like, I heard somebody say it, and I stole it, I say it now. We drink all we can and we sell the rest. And like, ultimately, we want this to be an expression of what our brand values, and we don't want to get to the point, or what our family values. We want the brand to be what our family values. And so we don't want to get to the point, or I personally don't want to get to the point, I can't speak for everyone, I don't want to get to the point where we have to do XYZ just because the machinery of the business dictates, like, oh, we've expanded so big and we have all these salespeople and we need to keep this thing forward, like forward momentum, otherwise it's going to fall apart. And then all of a sudden you're compromising what you really believe in. And that's never how we've acted. And I don't want to act that way either.
yeah. So you are living the dream.
I'm living the dream. Yes.
And every that.
Cheers. Yeah, everybody, a lot of people say that, and people ask me every once in a while, like, oh, how are you doing? I was like, living the dream. And people usually chuckle, because that people often say that when they don't mean it. Yeah. But yeah, I'm pretty lucky.
Love that you're living the dream. Congratulations on all of your hard-earned success.
Thank you.
It's good to see another Sauk Prairie grad who came back and is doing even better things in Sauk Prairie, and continuing to make this community great. So thanks for taking the time to chat with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And cheers till I can see you again.
Cheers.